Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the 2026 Annual Conference and Book Fair for AWP. I know it's been a little foggy out there, but Baltimore really is beautiful, I promise. I'm Courtney Santo. I'm a member of the AWP board. I teach at the University of Memphis. And I just want to let you guys know that AWP is a small nonprofit, but we work really hard to amplify the voice of writers and academic programs, all while trying to champion diversity and excellence in creative writing. I personally have been coming to AWP for 17 years, which seems almost insane, maybe one off in all that time. But I do think that if you're not a member, I would love for you to consider becoming a member. This is where I found my community. Memphis is a great place for music and food, but very not a great cultural literary city. And I came here and really found my own community. So I would urge you guys, if you're not a member, to consider becoming a member. Only about 40% of you are. So I know there's at least a couple of you out there that could be members. I want to thank the National Book Foundation. It's our literary partners that help make sponsored and featured events like this possible. It also helps us keep our conference affordable and accessible. I have just a few reminders. Please respect the seats in the front as reserved and for attendees with accessibility needs. And then I'd like you guys to give the authors about 10 minutes after they're done with their panel before you go ahead and line up out at the table for your book signings. Beyond that, I just want to say it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome Ruth Dickey from the National Book Foundation, who's going to introduce this event.
Okay, hopefully this won't mess up the double mic. Okay, hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Ruth Dickey. It's my great pleasure to be the Executive Director of the National Book Foundation. Thank you so much, Courtney, for that warm welcome. Thank you, Shannon, for live captioning today's event. And thank you to everybody who's joined us here and joining us online. Thank you to everyone who's working so hard behind the scenes at AWP to make this conference possible. We're so excited to have you all here with us today. At the National Book Foundation, we work year-round to bring books, community-driven programming, and National Book Award honored authors to readers across the country. I hope you'll all join us online this spring across the country for Read with NBF, which is to read along the 2025 National Book Award winners with me each month, and then join me live for live events with the authors. Then we'll be back this coming summer for our third annual summer reading adventure to show that reading prizes aren't just for kids. Learn about our year-round efforts at nationalbook.org, and please subscribe to our e-newsletter so we can stay in touch. We'll be passing around a clipboard, and Natalie's got it, so that you can sign up. Today, it is my absolute pleasure to be joined on stage with two brilliant National Book Award honored authors, Pemi Aguda and Helen Phillips. Pemi and Helen will both read from their work, and then we'll dig into a conversation about if and how they think about genre as part of their own writing and reading practices, and how genre fits into the wider landscape of contemporary literature, awards, and readership. Emily and Natalie, we're going to wave at you, are circulating around the room with note cards in case you have questions that you'd like to ask the authors, and we'll save time at the end for your questions. So please do use those cards and hand them up. Immediately outside the ballroom, the authors' books are available for purchase with huge thanks to our partners at the Ivy Bookshop. And as you just heard, Pemi and Helen will be outside immediately following for a reception. So I hope that you will each get a copy of their books and get them to sign them. And now I'm delighted to introduce our exceptional writers who will be joining me on stage. Pemi Aguda is an MFA graduate from the Helen Zell Writers Program at the University of Michigan. Her writing has been published in Granta, Plowshares, Zoetrope All Story, and other publications, and has been awarded the O. Henry Prize for Short Fiction. She's from Lagos, Nigeria, and is currently living in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Her debut story collection, Ghost Roots, was a finalist for the 2024 National Book Award for Fiction, and her debut novel, One Leg on Earth, is out this May. Helen Phillips is the author of 6 books, including the novel Hum, a Slate Top 10 book of 2024 and a New York Times Editor's Choice. She is the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and a Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award. Her novel, The Need, was longlisted for the National Book Award. She received the John Gardner Fiction Book Award and was a finalist for the New York Public Library Young Lions Award and the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. Her writing has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, and The New York Times, and she teaches at Brooklyn College. Please join me in giving a huge warm welcome to Pemi and Helen. Helen, would you want to read first? And we'll go in this order.
Sure. Yes.
Right.
The mic seems good. Yes. Okay. Firstly, I just want to thank you, Ruth and Natalie and Emily and the National Book Foundation for inviting us. It's really wonderful to be here. Thank you to AWP for hosting us. And Pemi, I'm so honored to be here with you. And thank you all for coming. I see some beloved familiar faces in the audience and also unfamiliar faces, so welcome to all of you. So I'm going to read the opening of my novel, Hum, because it's set in a slightly alternate reality, and so I'll just start at the beginning to help introduce you to the world. Chapter 1. The needle inched closer to her eye, and she tried not to flinch. Above her, the hum hovered, immaculate and precise. The steadiness of metal, the peace of a non-biological body. She had heard of elderly people who, at the end, chose hum company over human company. The hum paused to dip its needle finger in antiseptic yet again, then re-extended its arm, a meticulous surgeon. Its labor was calm, deft, as hum labor always was. Yet the pain grew crisp as the needle moved across her skin toward the edge of her eye, a slender and relentless line of penetration. The numbing gel must be wearing off. She had twice endured childbirth by imagining her way out of her body into a forest, the forest of her childhood, a faint path weaving among evergreens. But now the forest of her childhood was receding even in her memory. She needed to picture some other forest, not that particular forest, which was gone, burned. A forest. She tried to force her mind into a forest. The hum retracted the needle and, with the fingers of its other hand, carefully reapplied numbing gel to the area around her eyes. She felt that the hum had read her mind, though she realized it was simply reacting to the mathematically dictated decrease in the gel's effectiveness over time. "Please let me know," the hum said, such a soothing voice, "when it is numb again, May." Long before hums existed, she was one of many hired to help refine and deepen the communicative abilities of artificial intelligence. She had taken satisfaction in the process, in the network's increasing conversational sophistication and nuance, and her small but meaningful role in that progress, until the network exceeded human training and no longer needed their input. But despite all those years of hours spent at her desk in dialogue with the network, it was very different to be speaking to a hum in person, to have a hum's actual body near her actual body, each of them taking up a similar amount of space in the room. She had never before been this close to a hum for this length of time, for this intimate a procedure. Back when she still had dental insurance, her dentist proudly introduced his new colleague, a hum with dental tools in place of finger attachments. She was tense the whole 20 minutes, her toes clenched inside her shoes, but her teeth had never felt so fresh. The hum passed her a plastic cup of water. It was not wearied by the hours of labor. Probably there would be someone else after her, another guinea pig, and another, for the hum could go on and on and on, charging remotely, its grace unyielding, while she frayed more by the minute, her body sweating and growing thirsty. The first time she had seen a hum standing at a bus stop on a sunny day last year, she had mistaken it for a sculpture, clean silver lines of arms and legs and neck, linking oblong head and torso and feet, small spheres at elbow and wrist and knee and ankle joints, polished plastic and brushed aluminum, a gleaming thing. A week later, she saw another hum on the subway, and soon enough, she saw them on a regular basis, dispensing medications at the pharmacy, taking the kids' blood pressure at the pediatrician, patrolling the streets alongside human police officers in such high demand by government institutions and private corporations that the company who had figured out how to so elegantly embody the expansive brain of the network had a wait list months long. "Thank you," she said, accepting the plastic cup of water from the hum. She sat up in the operating chair to drink the water. "Do you want to see yourself, May?" the hum said. "No," she said, "thank you." She would wait until the end, until the alteration was complete. Sitting up, momentarily free of the needle, she was overwhelmed by dread. What if Jem was right? He had cradled her face in his hands in bed last night, his eyes damp in the lamplight. It had been a long time since he had touched her with such care. "It's not like I'm going to die," she had said, closing her eyes. He moved his fingers over her eyelids, her nose and cheeks. "Money, honey," she said, opening her eyes, straining for levity. "Blood money," he said. "Skin money," he corrected. "Rent money," she corrected, a flash of rage. "Grocery money, dental bill money." He took his hands off her face, turned away from her with a pained sigh, reminding her of other middle-of-the-night conversations that had ended with a pained sigh. Staying up too late, exchanging panic about the children's futures. What will this planet hold for them by the time they're our age? Deliberately, she placed her hands on top of the knot in her stomach. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Can you hear me okay?
I don't know, it doesn't sound...
Hello. Do I just keep going?
Is the mic on? I feel like
Pemi's mic.
it doesn't have the same sound.
Hello. Yes, it's on now.
Okay, now.
Okay,
Yeah,
hi. Thank you, Helen. That was beautiful and unsettling in the best ways. Thanks, Ruth. It's an honor to be here. I'm going to be reading the first few paragraphs of the first story in my collection, which is Ghost Truths. All of the stories are set in Lagos, Nigeria, and the first one is called Manifest. This is the first pimple of your life. Question the foreign object with all your fingers. If you were to draw a straight line down from the right corner of your lip, then another straight line forward from the corner of your jaw, the pimple will be sitting at that intersection. Your index fingernail, false acrylic painted a burnt orange, flicks at the tiny bump. You press the pad of your thumb down on it hard. The pimple does not go away. You have just turned 26. Why now? Tonight, your mother calls you Agnes for the first time. Agnes is not your name. You are sitting at the dining table, picking beans, picking at this pimple. You like to sort beans on the white surface of the mahogany table that's older than you, sliding weevils and broken beans to a corner, making a route through the good beans so that you never have to lift them up. You think of the bad beans and weevils as lepers, driven out of the colony to live amongst themselves in disease and brokenness forever. When a weevil starts to creep back to the good beans, you stab at it. You love to feel them die. The crunch, then the give under the force of your finger. Flick the dead off, stab again. Your mother must have been standing there a while, because when you look up, there she is, frozen, gripping her Bible and hymn book bag to the golden buttons of her 90s suit. The illumination from the hallway bulb envelopes her so that her edges are blurred, half of her face eaten by light. Agnes? You ask, who's that? But your mother only shakes her head, retreating. Who is Agnes? You ask your father later that night. He's eating while watching a news report on the South Sudan Civil War. You sit at the foot of his armchair, pulling hairs from your arm in the glow of the television screen. Agnes is your mother's mother, your father tells you. She died when your mom was young. Show money. He questions your ignorance as he makes vile noises with his tongue and teeth in an attempt to dislodge beef. But what do Nigerian parents tell their children about their own parents, especially the Pentecostal Christians? Nothing. If you took a poll of your friends, 3 out of 5 would be similarly ignorant of these histories of parents who moved from somewhere to Lagos, left behind religions and curses and distant cousins and grimy pasts. You ask your father if he wants more beans and beef, your hand back on that pimple. He shakes his head no. Your father hates that you take the weevils out of the beans. He thinks they add a certain flavor to the dish. The second time your mother calls you Agnes, your little family of 3 is sitting in relative darkness. Electricity is out again, and false scarcity means that you only see each other in candlelight until the power is restored. Your father snores in the gray turned brown armchair you call Daddy's chair, while you and your mother sit across from each other at the dining table. You pull the empty Milo tin that the candle is mounted on closer to yourself. Wax slushes off slowly and trickles down his side. You close your left eye, then the right, then the left again, enjoying the way the flame shifts. You draw the candle even closer, sniffing at the flame. Your mother's face lifts from her phone screen and watches you. Through your left eye, you see her eyes widen. Through your right eye, you see her mouth open. Through both eyes, you see terror spread over her face the way it does when a flying cockroach is in the vicinity. Agnes, your mother's voice is all croak and phlegm. Agnes, is that you? Thank you.
Thank you both so much for those beautiful readings. I'd love to start with a question about genre. So both of your writings draw from and powerfully employ a slew of different possible genre motifs: horror, sci-fi, mythology, you name it. But I'd love to hear what you each think of as the relationship between your writing and genre.
When I'm writing, I don't think about genre very much. I think what genre does is give me a sense of permission. So if I want to say in the need, explore the way that motherhood can kind of divide your identity, I will feel at liberty to borrow a conceit that maybe is more science fictional, that there are two mothers from two parallel universes who end up intersecting. So it gives me permission to go to that place. One thing that was really interesting genre-wise with The Need is that though I thought about having it have the pacing of a thriller, that thought crossed my mind. And I thought about borrowing certain conceits that are maybe science fictional in nature. I never thought of it as a horror novel. That never crossed my mind. And yet when it was published, often it was described as being a horror novel about motherhood. And that was really strange for me because it was just the contents of my mind. And then I felt like it was getting labeled horror. So that was an interesting genre experience for me. But so I don't know, that was interesting. But then I think that I feel like whatever you readers, whatever people see in it, that's fine with me. I don't care if people see horror or see science fiction or thriller or whatever else they see. But I don't think about it except as just a feeling of literature can contain so many different possible things.
Yeah, similarly. Can you hear me once again? It keeps going off. Okay. Similarly, I don't think about genre when I'm writing. I've been thinking a lot of this Samantha Schweblin quote that I read in an interview where she said that for her, fiction is not about plot, but that for her, plot is about trying to transfer a very precise feeling from inside of her chest to inside somebody else's chest. And then the details are the plot. And I've been thinking about that in terms of genre too. Like, I have an idea, I have an atmosphere, I have a story that I want to tell, and then whatever form it takes, it takes. The thing about genre, we say is about expectation. And similarly, I think my work is labeled horror sometimes. But what that means is that some people who read a lot of horror come to my work expecting a certain kind of experience. And then when they don't get that, they're like, why is this horror? This is not horror. I mean, it's unsettling. Growing up in Lagos, I think everybody around me acknowledged both a physical and spiritual reality as normal. And so writing outside of reality, like outside of what most people consider reality, isn't necessarily strange. It's like taking as it is. And so I try not to think about genre because I don't want it to mess with what is already my own baseline of reality or what the people around me think about as their own baseline of reality. Yeah.
I'd love to hear, what do you think is missing in the conversation when we talk about genre?
I mean, I think for me, it's that genre itself is so flexible. Like, I imagine that when people were talking about whatever genre, like horror, 50 years ago, is very different from what people are talking about horror is right now. And again, I think about this line from Ross Gay's Acknowledgement of Beholding, where he talked about how, he is writing with and for everyone, and everything is debt and everything is gratitude. So in some ways, like everybody who is writing is working in so many traditions. So just the idea of genre itself is like, it's fluid in itself. So I think that's something I would like more people to think about. Just like there's no, genre itself is moving as our social contexts are also moving. Yeah.
Yeah, as I was thinking about this talk, I brought a quote to share that I think is really interesting. I came across it in David Shields' book, Reality Hunger, but the quote is from the writer Zola. Every proper artist is more or less a realist according to his own eyes. And then relatedly, Brock, the Cubist painter, said his goal is to get as close as I could to reality. And so to me, that sort of ties into what you were saying, that we are, as writers, we're just trying to express some kind of reality as we see it, and genre can be a way to help us get there. What is missing in the conversation about genre? I mean, to me, I don't really, sometimes I get unclear when we're talking about genre, whether it's more of a marketing thing or more of a creative experience, because I feel like a lot of genre stuff almost goes over to the marketing side of things. And that's a decision that almost doesn't get made by the writer in that practical sort of way. But I feel that I got my MFA in 2007, and I feel that since 2007, there's been a real, in my experience, like a real opening up in literary fiction of openness to having things that used to be siloed off in the genre realm more. I mean, literary fiction is its own genre too. I think it's a genre unto itself, but there's more openness of the blending between all the different genres, including literary fiction.
I think you're so right about that. I'm curious if either of you read genre, and if so, which ones?
All of them. I think I read all of them. Yes, I tend to, the kinds of work that I tend to gravitate towards are, I guess, what you would just call literature of the strange, which, I don't know, that's a title again that I took from Samantha Schweblin, where she was resisting the fact that people were calling Mouthful of Birds fantasy. And she actually said something interesting, which was that the idea that readers were going to that book thinking of it as fantasy told her more about the reader, because the fact that they couldn't imagine their lives going in that direction meant that it was safer for them to think of something as fantasy as opposed to thinking of themselves in those positions. So I do love a lot of work that just handles any kind of sliding of reality is interesting to me, like disorientation. That could be really, really small or just really, really big, and I tend to watch a lot of mystery shows. So that's a genre that is also, I grew up reading a lot of, yeah.
I like that sliding of reality. I like that as describing the literature of the strange. I mean, I do, like, is Ursula K. Le Guin genre? Is Ted Chiang genre? I love these writers. I guess they are. I feel like genre is kind of, in a way, a limiting label to call those writers science fiction writers. They're just people engaging deeply with the deepest questions of existence and putting it on the page. So I do love stuff like that. I feel like science fiction is such a vast, deep realm. I don't really feel that well read in it, but those sorts of writers I love. And Samantha Schweblin is my favorite writer of all time. So I'm glad she's come up a couple times already.
Yeah, I definitely think that's such a beautiful way to frame it, that really it's all wonderful writing getting at the most important questions. I'm curious, I loved each of your books that were honored by the National Book Award, The Need and Ghost Roots, and then your most recent books, Hum and the forthcoming One Leg on Earth. And I'd love to hear you each talk about how writing your most recent book was similar to or different from the previous book, and how being honored by the National Book Foundation did or didn't play a role in that next writing project.
Well, I'm lucky because when I submitted my story collection with my agent, I already had a pretty far along draft of my novel. So in that case, because of that, I was already in the middle of that work. So I don't feel like it's had much of I was far along with editing. And so I was already deep in the project, and it was something that I could go back into, like the fog of that book, because I'd been in it for about 5 or 6 years at that point without like outside coming in. Yeah.
I think it was such an exciting thing in my life, that honor from the National Book Foundation for the Need. And I think it, like other honors of that sort, it's just validating and gives you confidence. And when I write a novel, I work on it in complete solitude with not a single other soul reading it for such a long time. And to have just in the back of your mind, like, someone out there gave you this vote of confidence. It's a nice thing to carry with me into that cave of solitude. And especially with Hum, I was writing it during the pandemic and my kids were both remote schooling. It was a hard time to be creative and write. And it was wonderful that I had received that acknowledgement. It did help me going. So thank you for that.
Thank you for those beautiful books. One of the things that I loved about both of your books is how haunting kind of traces through them, whether it's literal in some of the stories and ghost routes or more figuratively. And Helen, I'm thinking about the doppelganger who haunts the need, and even the specter of needing hand cream that suggestively haunts Hum and now haunts me. Could you each talk about how you think about hauntings and both in your work and making writing that haunts the reader?
There's a class I taught a couple of years ago. I think it was called Kind of a Ghost Story. And what we were doing was thinking about how so many of the stories that we read are kind of ghost stories, like if you think about them, right? Because I think of haunting not necessarily only in your grandmother is in the closet, but also in the sense of just like all the things that have repressed coming back to the surface. I think there's a Toni Morrison quote about how if you pay attention, you'll see what's beneath what's already there. So I think of haunting just as the things you're ignoring, the things that you repress coming back to the surface. And in my, as for ghost truths, I was thinking a lot about family history that I didn't have access to, right? So my parents are very Pentecostal Christians who really believed in the idea of like all things have passed away, all things have become new. So they wouldn't take us back to like their villages or, I never visited my grandmother in her home. She always came to us because they wanted to like really separate these things. And yet, even though I didn't have access to all of that history, there will be times when I would be doing something or, my sister will be doing something. And my mother might say something like, oh, this reminds me of this person that you never met. And I just love the idea that our bodies are holding on to this history that our consciousness doesn't even have access to. And I think a lot of stories here writing into that gap of memory for myself. So that's how I think about hauntings, like all of these ancestors, all of these histories, all of these things that my consciousness has forgotten, but it's all coming back up to the surface in the moment, and then you have to confront it.
So to speak about the need and hauntings, the premise of the book is that there's one woman who has her children and she runs into and she encounters another version of herself who has the children have died. And so it really is a haunting, that kind of ghostly presence. In the book, she has her children, she's with her children. Actually, the two women are fighting over the children, but the presence of those lost children is, for me, like the dark core of the book. And so, yes, it's a very haunted book. And I feel like my answer to this is very personal, so I will be personal for a moment. But the same summer that my daughter was born, 8 weeks later, my older sister died. And so my new motherhood was completely characterized by both my love of this new child and by my parents' loss of their firstborn daughter and my grief for my sister. And so that simultaneity of life and death, that's my particular story. I know that you have all experienced the same thing in different ways, that it was the emotional seed of the need. And I think we are always haunted all the time by regret, by loss, by all those things. So fiction is how lucky we are, how lucky I feel to have a way to kind of play that out and bring it into the light and acknowledge it, because it's always there.
Thank you both for those beautiful answers. Connected to that a bit, I have a nerdy craft question for you, since we're in a room full of writers. You each so beautifully create forward propulsion on the page. And I'd love to know how much you do or don't think about that in writing and revision, and how you approach it.
I'll go first. Okay, I guess. Certainly at the beginning of the need, you're cutting between two different scenes, both of which have their own suspense. And that came to me pretty early in the writing process. And when I knew, TV shows and movies do it all the time. And it's so exciting when you're in one moment, you get invested, you care, you have to know, and then they cut you away from it. And then you get deeply invested in another scene and you really care and you have to know, and then they cut you away from it. It's kind of manipulative, but it's also really effective. And I love that feeling of just, I finish one chapter and I have to go on and I have to go on. So I really wanted to create that experience for the reader. And in Hum too, I think that, going back to what Samantha Schweblin said, plot is kind of a way to convey us towards deeper things. And for me, that kind of plot momentum is a technical thing you're doing, but ultimately what I hope to do with that kind of momentum is just take you to a really vulnerable, emotional place, where you are kind of ready to receive something deeper. That is my goal. I'm always trying to do that. But it's sort of a combination of, in the original draft, having that aim of being dynamic and having momentum. But a lot of that does come in revision too, because that tightening up and that real, okay, how can I make this propulsive, either in a quiet way or in a really in-your-face way? But that propulsion, sometimes it comes out better. Well, it always comes out better for me in the second draft.
For me, revision is a big part of it too. Once I've written a draft, I'm one of those people who reads aloud. So I read my draft aloud, and when I hear my own self getting bored by my own self, I know that something needs to happen. But I think I'm just really inspired by a lot of people in my life who know how to tell really good stories, right? I love to gossip with my friends on the phone. So we're talking for hours, and I have this certain friend, she's Yoruba, she's Nigerian too, and she's such an entertaining teller. She'll say, okay, so this happened yesterday. Hold that in one hand. I'm coming back to it. And then I'm like, oh, you should write some fiction. She's like, Pemi, I'm telling you a story. Forget about fiction for a second. So just like all these people in my life who are really good storytellers, I think it's kind of, I'm porous. It's all kind of entered me. Because when I'm writing a draft, I'm not really thinking about propulsion. I just want to tell a story, like what happened and what happened next, and then what happened after that. Like, what do you absolutely need to know for me to get to the next sentence? And yeah, that gets tightened in revision.
That makes sense. Helen, I'd love to ask you specifically about AI. I think you handle it so brilliantly and skillfully in Hum. And I'd love to hear about the research you did for it, and if your perspective on AI changed as you were writing or didn't.
Yeah, well, I wrote this book. I started writing it in 2019, and it just feels like we're in another universe with AI by this point. I did the final 12 pages of Hum are a bunch of endnotes and bibliography, which I've never done for one of my novels before, but I did so much reading and research in preparation for the book that I really I both needed to and also wanted to turn people to the sources that I had read with great interest. I read a ton about AI. One book I read about AI was called The Artist and the Machine by Professor Arthur I. Miller, and he was really writing about very positive potentials for human AI collaboration. I tend to go to the like robots will kill us all, but it was good to read a book that was more about positive possible outcomes. Kashmir Hill was doing incredible reporting in the Times and is continuing to about some of the surveillance enabled by our cell phones and how, yes, that data is anonymized, but how many people their phone is at my address for 8 hours, 7 hours, and then walks to Brooklyn College. Like, it doesn't take much. You can, by the location, it's not anonymized anymore. So that kind of surveillance that is enabled. So I read a lot about AI. I don't know. I'm very concerned about where we are right now. I think all of us share that concern, certainly as a teacher of writing, as a teacher, not really with my grads, but more with undergrads. As a parent, how are we going to continue to cherish the written word, the human crafted word, as AI becomes more capable and more and more capable of imitating it? So I don't have any answers. I just have questions, but I would say that my biggest inspiration is my anxiety, and that my anxiety about AI was a big motivator for Hum. I didn't resolve anything in writing the book, but I did read a lot about AI. So I'm not surprised by where AI is now. Like in 2019, the people who were writing about that knew that it was happening. So I guess there's something kind of encouraging that some people who were paying attention did see this coming. I don't think I said anything that's going to help anyone with this problem, but I did get the opportunity to think a lot about it and read a lot about it as I was trying to process that anxiety.
I love the processing anxiety as kind of a through line.
Yes, that is the creative process for me.
Yes, totally. Pemi, I love the Ghost Roots is a collection of stories, and now you have a novel. And I wanted to ask you how putting both together was similar or different? Like, how was it to go longer form for you?
Oh, it was very different. I still consider myself a short story writer. I guess I'm going to have to start thinking differently. But for me, short stories are these pleasurable deep dives into, some atmosphere or idea, and then I'm done. I write a draft, I'm done, put it aside, come back a year later, revise it. Sometimes one of the stories in this book, I had a dream, and then I woke up and wrote a whole draft of this. So excellent. Can't do that for a novel. The novel was the most frustrating thing I've ever had to do in my life. It was just so hard for me to hold everything in my head. So the very first draft of this novel, I wrote in a class at Michigan at U of M, where our professor, it was like a novel writing class. The idea was to write one novel in a semester. And I was going to take a songwriting class instead because I'm not a novel writer. But the director convinced me to do it. And that was where the very first zero draft of this idea came. And my first instinct was to approach this story as a short story writer. So I would write one chapter, I would get bored with that character, I'll pick another person in the city and write a story about them, and then come back. And, when I came back to the story eventually and decided, okay, I'm going to take this seriously, some of that went away, some of it stayed. But I remember even when my editor, acquired the book and was giving me feedback the first time, there were just huge swathes of, this is an excellent short story. Please cut it out. So my brain was still thinking in that just short burst, thinking. So it was a lot of brain rewiring. It was mostly about scope. It was about holding an idea for an extensive period of time. There was a way I would just move through the world, and everything I saw was just layered over with novel. I would be dancing in the club and I'll be writing notes about the novel, oh, I need to edit this. I'll be going on a run and I would stop and bring out my phone and do edits. So that's the way it took over my life in a way that short stories don't particularly do because they're so contained. Yeah.
I love the metaphor of it taking over your life.
It did.
We have amazing questions from the audience, but before I segue to those, I'd love to hear what was the first book you each fell in love with?
The first? Childhood?
Sure.
So The first book that made me cry, and I remember it so distinctly, I was 6 years old, and it's my parents had a version of it. It's The Nightingale and the Rose it's a story by Oscar Wilde, and it's about a nightingale. I'm going to tell this story. I'm just going to do it with you guys. I'm going to tell you the story. And he sees this student is in love with this beautiful young girl, and he asks her to the dance, and she'll say, "I'll go to the dance with you if you bring me a perfect rose." And the nightingale is so moved by the student's plight that she pierces her body on the rose thorn so that a beautiful rose will grow, and like sacrifices her life so that the student will have this rose to give to this girl. And so this nightingale dies, the student sees the rose, he's so excited, he takes it to the girl, and she's already gone off with some guy who gave her jewelry instead. Amazing. And it's Oscar Wilde, so it's just beautifully told. And I was beside myself. We had to go out to a dinner party that night, and I was like, I can't go. I'm too upset to go. So that was mine.
Oh, okay. Mine was Mallory Towers by Enid Blyton. Does anybody know Enid Blyton? Yes, I think most, the colonized people know, because it was this British author that really a lot of Nigerians were reading. But Mallory Towers in specific was this series of just these girls in boarding school, like a British boarding school. And I was obsessed with it. And I think till today, I love a good school novel. I love a good book that sets in just like the crucible of that world and how group dynamics are formed. But I remember Mallory Towers, they would go have so many shenanigans, like so many fun things at night. And as a lonesome child, I think there was something that was appealing of just the frenzy of this school that appealed to me. Yeah.
I love those stories. Thank you. All right. We have great questions from the audience. The first one is, do you find yourselves writing in your own personal genre? If so, how would you describe it? And if not, how has your writing changed or avoided genre over time?
I love that phrasing, your own personal genre. I kind of feel like that would be my hope for every single writer, that we're all writing in our own personal genre. A review of Hum said Helen Phillips makes anxiety a genre, which I was like, I don't know how to feel about that, but I guess I just confess that my writing arises from anxiety. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That takes me back to that quote of every writer is a realist according to their own eyes. That yes, by trying to evoke reality as you see it, you do kind of need to create your own genre in order to do that.
I guess I maybe want to wait 10 years and have somebody else tell me what they think my personal genre is. But in the middle of it, I can't think about it. I mean, I assume because of my very specific experience in the world, I'm writing, my own concerns, the things I've read. Just every person is so unique in that way. So in some ways, we are all writing our own personal genre. I just do not have language to describe it. I heard a couple of people describe my work as Nigerian Gothic. I'm like, that sounds sexy, but I don't know what it means, What was the other part of the question? But that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Next question from the audience. Can you share some examples of other media, film, music, etc., that influences your work?
I read a lot of graphic novels. I gave a class the other week about disorientation or just our world got askew. And while I was talking, I realized that one of the things I really love about graphic novels, or the ones that I read, is that sometimes it's about perspective. So sometimes just this kind of visual zooming in or coming at a scene or a composition from just this particular eye, it does something that my brain can't articulate, but it makes me think about composition and scene in different ways. One of the stories in this book was definitely inspired by murder mystery, because I truly do love to watch them. Like, I love especially the kind of murder mysteries that makes me feel bad for the killer at the end of the episode, because it's complicated, right? I like messy complications, and I guess I find a lot of that in murder mysteries. A lot of music too, but only, I think the part of my brain that loves music in terms of writing is a part of my brain that wants to hold on to the mysticism of like writing and the rich literature and all of these things. And so when I put on a song that feels haunting and my whole body is reacting in this way and I'm compelled to write, there's no language for that. It's just like an embodied response that's happening. Yeah.
I mean, I don't feel any totally direct connections with my books, but I feel very much the idea of just permission. Like when you see an incredible movie, like, I don't know, even I'm thinking of that, The Substance, just like going that far with body horror. That sort of feels like permission of a sort. Certainly David Lynch movies feel that way. I have a playlist going for my new book that I'm working on, and it is so helpful just to have that almost like somatic cue of the scene that I'm in. So I love looking outward and kind of breaking the seal of the page to encounter other mediums is always refreshing. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is, do you have any advice on finding journals and presses that are open to experimental and cross-genre work?
I mean, I feel like most these days are. I stumbled upon like an AMA with Deborah Treisman on Reddit, where somebody asked if she would accept genre, and she said, "We'll accept a good story." So that's at the bottom of it. I think most spaces, when I was submitting at 21, I didn't have any idea of what genre meant. I just would write a story and send it to every publication, and some of them accepted it. And it wasn't until much later that I started realizing, oh, there are genre mags, there are spec fic mags. I would say try everything, so long that it's a story that is alive, and there's a story that you're telling that's alive. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of openness, like more openness. Yeah. There is. I do love conjunctions for that in particular, and I feel like Black Warrior Review also, or two, that in my mind have a focus on that to some extent. But I agree, send it everywhere. Teach the magazine what a great story is.
The next question is, did the genre you thought your book would publish as change at any point from when you started it? Or did either your agent or your editor give you any input about genre or how your book might be seen or how to categorize it?
I don't feel that it changed or that I was pressured. I don't know. I'm lucky to be connected to people who let me do what I do, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have a conversation about genre. I think it only came up when they were deciding who to send these things to, and I guess because I had stories that were published in genre publications and had stories published in more like, it was all around the spectrum. So I think maybe they thought that meant there was like a wider, there were people on all sides of the aisle who were interested in it, but we never really had a conversation about what genre my book was. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I know that you are both fiction writers, and this next question is about creative nonfiction and kind of that line. And the question asker is asking, do you think that any of these questions of genre breaking also show up in memoir and personal essay? And I don't know if either of you also write personal essays, but as readers or as writers.
I don't write memoir or personal. I'm afraid of personal essays. But in terms of genre, I was actually thinking about Carmen's nonfiction book. I think that that's somebody who is actually thinking really hardly about genre and like genre conventions. And in the Dream House is such an excellent way of like thinking about how genre can be such a creative constraint. In that book, she's thinking about like the Dream House as a soap opera, the Dream House as Choose Your Own Adventure. So there's a way that the creative constraint of a genre like helps her, I think she said, get to memories that she might not have gotten to if she was just trying to tell the story straight on. So I think I love genre when people use it as experimentation, as play. So yeah.
Yeah, I too don't write a ton of memoir or creative nonfiction, but I have in the past, and I have found that one piece in particular called Life Care Center, approaching it was very hard subject matter from my life, and I had to approach it in a fragmented way that was definitely not the essay with blocks of text. I mean, a lot of people do that now, but sometimes I feel like for difficult subject matter, I need to approach it in lots of different angles and in a fragmented way. And so it's not so much thinking about genre, but just how do you say something that's really, really hard to say?
Absolutely. This next question goes back to that question we were talking about around hauntings. And the question is, would either of you be open to talking about political or historical hauntings and how the past overshadows the current political moment?
I don't feel that the hauntings that I'm writing about are political or historical. I like the idea of I like books that do that, but I don't feel like I personally can speak to that.
I mean, again, when I was talking about like hauntings, like there's things that we cannot run away from. Like I'm come from Nigeria, which is a country that was colonized, and in a way, like we're still like having to deal with the effect of that experience. So in a way, yes, we are still haunted by colonialism. So there's no way to remove the politics from that. Like life in Lagos is irremovable from that history. So history is always haunted. We talked earlier about the question you asked in Miami about, the difference between like place haunting and body haunting. And I was talking to a friend afterwards. I've never been to Tulsa, Oklahoma, but this friend said that whenever he steps into that city, like he can feel the weight. Like there's something about the weight of that history that's just like hanging in the air. I don't think it's possible to just like even just walk, like the experiences we have, like just walking down the street are influenced by all the things that came before us. So like, all the hauntings are political. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I love that we're in a room full of writers. So I have a process question for you. And this writer would love to know how your process evolves over the course of writing and revising, moving between, say, character or plot versus idea and theme. And more broadly, would you each be willing to talk a bit about your writing process and what it's like?
You can go.
Okay. So when I am writing a novel, the first step for me is for about a year and a half or 2 years, I just gather a very, very long list of notes, and that's sort of like images or nightmares or dreams or things I overheard on the subway or an interesting newspaper headline, all these little scraps that I feel like they somehow belong together or bounce off of each other. So then my first step of writing the book is just sorting through those 100 pages. It takes me a very long time. It's quite a daunting task. And I have some ideas for scenes and some idea for plot. And then based on that document, which is kind of an outline, but outline is a very generous term because it has more chaos in it than that, I craft what I call my draft zero. And then after I have draft zero, that's when I would maybe make an outline for the book and start to really pull it out. And then I do many more drafts after that. But it does begin with the random 100-page list.
I have no one answer because processes feel very different for whatever I'm working on. Like I said, there was that story that came from a dream. When I was working in Lagos, I would have to drive to work about 2 hours with traffic just back and forth. And so I spent all of that time listening to the radio. And so some of the stories in this book are inspired by these stories that people would call in and talk about. Nigerians are very fun. And so there's just rife inspiration everywhere. Sometimes I might misread a sentence of a book and that sent my head in another direction. Or my novel, for example, something had happened in Lagos and I just turned to the friends around me and said, oh, but what if the water is angry? And that was just a really small note that kind of inspired this whole thing. And then when I write a draft, I do a revision process, which involves reading aloud. It involves sometimes writing, I print something out and then I kind of have to draft all over again from the beginning. Peter Ho Davis, who was our professor at UMich, talks a lot about revision being playing with a dial. And so if there's something I'm not satisfied with on the page, for example, if I think a character is not working, then I might write a draft where that person is exaggerated and another draft where that person is muted. And at some point I find like a sweet spot. So it's just a lot of playing around and trial and error. Yeah.
The way that things from the subway and things from the radio make their way into your work. Is there anything about your writing routine that you think would surprise readers?
I love to paint my nails. It's part of my process. I like to have something interesting dancing around the keyboard. It keeps my brain entertained. It's true. More seriously, I also love to read poetry. I think before I sit down when I'm in the middle of drafting, I like to read language that just inspires and challenges me, and then I start my own work. Yeah.
I don't know if this is surprising, but every day before I start to write, I meditate for a few minutes and try to really think about the fact that I'm made of atoms and really, really absorb that fact. And then I try to write atoms,
Yeah, that's all.
I love it. Question asker would like to know, how can learning the act of short story writing help you be a better novelist? Or can it?
They're helpful little Petri dishes, I think, definitely. But it's, as you laid out, it's such a different experience to write the two of them. But I think one thing that's very similar for me among short stories and novels is they will always contract upon revision, and just realizing that the first draft will be more and then the revision process. So usually for both stories and novels, usually I make them, they'll be half as long by the final draft, or 2/3 of the initial draft. So just the power of crystallizing down is really significant to me in both.
Yeah. I wish I knew. I'm still figuring it out. Just in the sense that no writing is wasted, right? Like every work we're doing is teaching us to be better writers. And so nothing is wasted. As I'm learning how to write characters in a short story, that will become relevant when I write a novel. Some of the abandoned short stories in my folder, there are some in my, folder of, abandoned things. There are some paragraphs and sentiments that found their way into the novel because they didn't work in one form, but they worked in another. So I think of it just all as practice and how nothing is ever wasted. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the idea of nothing ever being wasted. Question from the audience. What advice would you give to a writer who's attempting to pitch a novel idea that doesn't fit neatly into a single genre?
I think it'd be helpful maybe to see what other contemporary fiction is out there that is, even if your work doesn't fit into a genre, is there anything that you are excited about, books that are being published now that you feel like are in some sense a kindred spirit of your work. And I would see who is representing those books and who is publishing those books. And I would approach those people so that you'll know that they're open to that kind of thing. What do you think? I don't know.
Ditto.
Pemi, this question is specifically for you. This person writes, your story, Imagine Me Carrying Tone, is one of my favorites from your collection. Did you always intend to write it from the first person perspective, or is there a version of it that was written in the third?
Thank you. I'm usually touched when people bring up that story because it's not one of the ones. I think that story was always first person. So for those who don't know, Imagine Me Carrying You is about a young woman who goes back home, finds out her mother has killed another person in an accident. And then the story is just this woman, the daughter and her mother in this house with the mother's grief kind of making her unravel throughout the course of the story. I think I always knew I wanted to write that in first person because it's about the daughter being envious of this other girl that her mother has killed and being like, why don't you have time for me? And like for those concerns, I think I really wanted to get into the kind of spaciousness that first person allows for that kind of digging into just, what's going on. I hope that answered the question. Yeah.
Thank you. To go back to some nuts and bolts, what does your writing schedule look like for each of you?
It depends. I haven't actually written since last year, and I'm one of those people who doesn't believe you have to write every day. And so I allow myself take a long break whenever I want to take a long break. But when I am in the middle of it, like I said, I'll try to read something with language that makes me excited. And then I'll get into some writing with music going around me. And then when I feel like I've exhausted some kind of push, I'll put it aside and go away and do other things. And then I like to appraise my work in a different form from the way I wrote it before. So if I had written on my big monitor, I might then try to read it on my phone screen at night, just so that there's a way my brain thinks I'm reading something alien, even though it's exactly the same thing. And that way I do a little editing, then I go back to a different device the next day. So yeah, something like that.
I'm pretty regimented about it because of my family and work obligations. So I get my kids to school and then I come home and settle down and write for 1 or 2 hours. And then I go and do whatever I need to do for my students at Brooklyn College. It's in the morning, after the family and before the students is my time.
As we're gathered here in creative community, I'd love to hear for each of you what creative community means to you and how it's part of your writing process.
Oh, it's so important. As I mentioned earlier, just that you're in solitude so much. And so feeling like there are people. I think one thing for me, like for a novel, because I write novels without showing them to anyone, just knowing that someone is waiting to read it is really helpful. So I have a few people in my life, a handful of, I finished a first draft of my new book just last week, and just having those people to send it to who are like, oh, I'm happy to have this, that's helpful. Thank you. But along the way, I think teaching is actually, I have some of my former students here that gathering multiple times a week in this. I think of workshop as a very sacred endeavor. And even if we're not talking about my work, just people in a room reading one another's work, trying to understand each other. I feel like what we're doing is you're taking your freak flag and making it discernible to others. Like that's what we're doing, and doing that in communion with other people as a teacher is really meaningful as well.
I was just telling somebody I saw down at the book fair that part of why AWP is so wonderful and overwhelming is that I came to this country for grad school, and now 9 years later, 80% of the people I know in this country are writers, and like 60% of them are probably here, at AWP. But with just the fact that I have so many people in my life who are thinking about art, thinking about literature, it's so inspiring to me. I just kind of want to always be around people who are curious and excited about the world, and just having conversations with my friends always gets me so inspired. So whenever I'm walking through something, I, schedule a Zoom call with a friend, and by the end of it, I'm just bubbling with excitement and ideas. And in that way, creative community just means everything. I mentioned Ross Gay at the beginning of this, where he said, we're writing with and for, and there's a lot of gratitude and there's a lot of depth. And that's how I think about it too. Even as a teacher, which all my friends know, I always said I'm not a teacher. I hate it. But I find that writing, just like talking about stories with my students, gets me excited. So I'm even surprised myself. But we just connect on that level of being excited by the same thing, and that opens my mind to so many things. So I'm porous and open and excited because the people in my life are living on that frequency too. Yeah.
It's beautiful. I want to give space for if you would like to talk about the next projects. I know, Helen, you said you just finished it up. Pemi, you have a book coming out soon. If also you don't want to talk about it, that's totally fine. You can be like cone of silence, not talking about it. Is there anything you'd like to share about these next projects?
Cone of silence for this one, but I'm so excited because your book is coming out soon, so you should start talking about it.
I'm trying to start talking about this book.
This is your practice time.
Yes. Forgive me. I'm about to do a bad job. But I have a novel coming out in May. It's called One Leg on Earth. It's set in Lagos, Nigeria. A newcomer to the city comes into the city, has a one-night stand, becomes pregnant. She's an intern at an architecture firm that's designing developments at a waterfront community. And she's really, really lonely, and she just wants a full, wonderful life. And so she's just putting out feelers there, her work people, the people she meets around. And then we find out that pregnant women in Lagos are kind of walking into water bodies and killing themselves. And so she starts to think, do I want to do this? What's happening there? Is there a reason here? And while all of this is happening, strange things are happening at work too. Yeah, that's the book. It's very short too.
It's beautiful. You can all look forward to it. It's amazing. I know that you are both amazing writers and amazing readers. So are there books that you are loving that our audience should find and read?
This is somebody most people know, but I only just discovered Claire Louise Bennett. I read Checkout 19, and I told my friend Mauriel, I think who's here, just about how much that book has opened my mind in terms of reminding me that fiction, we can do anything in fiction. Like, it's so playful, and yet it goes to serious places, and things loop back and forth and back and forth. And it's just, I've been talking about it forever, since I read it 2 weeks ago. The Memory Museum, which is a short story collection by M. Lane. It's coming out in April. It's about migration, about China and America, and music. There's a lot of really beautiful references to music. So that's one that's on my mind right now.
A lot of what I've been reading lately is student work, which is always a pleasure. Coming soon to a shelf near you, but it's still in development. But the most recent book I read that blew my mind is a book that has been around for a long time, but The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. I read that in January, and that is really just staying with me. And I have a couple former students, Meg Charlton and Natalie Adler, who have books coming out this summer. So excited for those to publish.
Well, we will look forward to finding all of those. Thank you both for such a beautiful conversation. Thank you for your gorgeous books. Thank you all for being with us. Yeah. And everyone, please go and buy books, and we'll see you at book signing. Yeah. Yay.